It's great to have you both on What Just Happened. Thank you for coming, Liza Amlani and Roz Griner. Why don't you each tell us briefly about where your specialty lies? Liza, why don't you go first?
I work with brands and retailers on improving organizational effectiveness and increasing profitability, whether that means improving speed to market, assortment planning, go to market strategies, or reducing overdevelopment.
And Roz?
So I worked on the other side. I was the marketer working with the merchants in various retail organizations, fashion and beauty. And now I've pivoted into social media and being a content creator and working with companies that way, as well as consulting on branding.
So retail's crazier than ever, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
Yes.
Yes, that's a good answer.
When I'm working with brands and talking to market leaders, the thing that they keep bringing up is that retail fundamentals are missing. We haven't advanced or evolved how the customer is evolving and what they want to see from us.
We've really seen a return to the store. We've seen direct to consumer brands collapsing on themselves and going either out of business or not making any financial sense. Nike is a prime example of that.
The big pronouncement that we're going to be D2C only and then be like, never mind, we'll be in Foot Locker as originally planned. I want to dig in a little bit, Liza, because fundamentals are missing. What do you mean?
I think retailers and brands are really caught up in being reactive. So there's a lot of Band-Aid solutions. They have to stop and start thinking, okay, why are we here? What purpose are we serving? What is the product assortment that is the most relevant to our customer? And let's start driving demand instead of meeting demand.
Traditionally, retailers have always looked, history will dictate the future demand. But that's not the case anymore. The customer has so evolved and changed. We don't actually talk to the customer enough. And the frontline staff actually have so much information about what's the customer saying, what are they returning, why are they complaining. Then you got to mesh that with all the social media chatter, because today they don't call customer service to complain. They complain on social media, whether they go on TikTok directly or Instagram. So you have to have really senior people managing and social listening.
We're not closing the feedback loop. We're not actually bringing feedback in a standardized way and sharing it out across milestone moments in a product creation calendar or in a go-to-market process.
You guys have hit on major things. It's so great. It's a masterclass for anyone listening. I hope everyone's taking notes. Loving that the Beat Last Year book made an appearance here where Roz, you refer to history dictates the future. That's just in the industry's DNA. It's like, what did we do last year? Okay, market up 3%. Okay, ready, teams, go. There's a real missing piece, the voice of the customer. Well, you guys have talked about the voice of the customer. I have seen tons of tech solutions proposing that they give that voice of the customer. Why is that not getting back?
I talk to so many merchants and designers who never go on the shop floor. That's a retail fundamental. Why are you not talking to your customers? Why are you not helping them in the fitting room? I'll tell you, 20 years as a buyer, as a merchant lead, I would still go to the shop floor at least once a week. I was on the shop floor, whether I was validating my buys, whether I was understanding, okay, how has the customer evolved, bringing those fundamentals back, getting teams on the shop floor and talking to the customer, whether you're marketing, merch, design, or supply chain, right? We need to get out there and see what's happening with our adjacent brands, our competition, but also with our customer.
We are seeing that products don't have a long life cycle anymore. And so you don't want to carry a lot of inventory. The sort of pile 'em high days are over. Being shallow and being reactive, that's where the Asian Chinese sites like Shein and Temu and all that, they are able to be so reactive and change up their inventory so quickly. The retail landscape has so shifted. And that's also changing up where consumers are and how they're shopping and how they're consuming products.
Zara walked so Shein and Temu could run. Zara was the benchmark for reactive production. They were using small, local, mostly Spain, but throughout Europe, factories. I'm personally not a fan of the fast fashion Shein and Temu model from a sustainability standpoint. I want to add one more little non-technical way that fundamentals falls under fundamentals is that many people on the team, marketing, merch, sales, should try on the clothes once they're in the store.
Are we not doing that anymore?
I don't know. I have
I
no
always
idea.
used to ask the merchants, would you wear what you're putting on the shop floor?
I always try it on everything because you want to see how it fits, right? You want to see how does this make you feel? I was speaking at Baratax in India, and I talked about what we can learn from these brands, even though we might not agree with them. So from Zara, Inditex, the vertical supply chain, that's something that's super relevant today because of laws coming into place around transparency and of course speed to market. And then when you think about Shein, how do they use customer data? Because they're really a tech company. How are they using that data to test the market and then go into production?
Let's talk about Gap. Exciting stuff coming out from a branding standpoint. New CEO using the Barbie blueprint, creating a zeitgeist around the brand. Interesting. Liza, take Gap, run with it. Let's go.
I think the social launch was great. I loved it actually, because of course it took us back a decade. But the fact is they have quality issues and they're on markdown. And this was just launched, which of course is very aligned with what Gap Inc. does, which is excessive markdown and promotional activity, which really devalues a brand. And then also Zach Posen, like, what's the deal, right? I think he's wonderful. I love what he does. I'm curious to see how you're going to take a designer that's known for a few things and take it to mass. I think that there's an opportunity there, which I love, but I think that Gap Inc. needs to really think about reducing development, streamlining their assortment. Like, we need to get tighter here. You can't have SKU rationalization every single year. That's a Band-Aid solution. And lastly, reducing that markdown activity.
As a marketer, I love the campaign with Tyla and Jungle, but I wish they had saved it for when they actually changed the clothing, because I think it's a missed opportunity to gain so much visibility for a campaign, but not when you go to the website and you look at that linen collection. It's so sad looking. It doesn't actually look like the campaign, because that campaign was aimed at a lot of like really young Gen Z or whatever to go and buy into the brand. Of course, all the millennials remember the dancing campaigns from the 90s, but this is reaching a new younger generation. But if the clothing doesn't actually align with the generation, you have a major disconnect. So I think that was a miss. And Zach Posen, he's known for evening gowns. And if anyone remembers, he did do a private label for department stores. It was a massive failure. Does anyone remember Z-Post?
Yes.
No.
I remember.
So I'm just saying, I don't understand. I think he's a lovely young man. I think he's very creative. I think he does really beautiful red carpet gowns, but I don't know that he has what it takes to actually do a mass reach everyone kind of casual line, because I haven't seen evidence of that in his past designs.
My biggest question when I heard about the appointment, I was like, okay, so who is Gap's customer? Gap, the brand Gap, not Gap Inc. Who is Gap's customer? Who are they speaking to? Because it's not clear there. And then if you layer on this campaign, it's very directional. It speaks to a very culturally relevant subgroup of people, age be gone, could be anybody. And then it goes back to our first conversation, which is Gap in a position where they can actually drive a trend? And it's probably a little too soon to think that Gap can drive a trend. They need to follow a trend. And there's nothing wrong with that. Get in that cut and make your money, because you are doing what is successful out there at the moment.
What they did differently was, of course, with the campaign, how it was very fashion forward, linen moves, great tagline, having Tyla in there. But I just went on the website and the first thing I noticed was 40% off fresh picks and 40% off sale. In the fall, I was teaching fashion marketing and digital technology. It was so interesting every day to be in this room with Gen Z. And they were just mortified that, first of all, that they'd have to go to a mall to go to a Gap store or go into the one in Times Square. But they're like, none of this product speaks to us. This is not us. Also the fit. Like, we have to talk about the fit. Did they change the fit blocks? Because I haven't seen any change in the fit blocks across any of the banners. If you don't know who your customer is, how can you create an assortment? And then having a leader that Gen Z can't relate to, if that's your target audience, where are we finding that connect?
When I think about the Gap and I walk into the Gap, I feel like it's almost like for an oversized customer because like their fit is really large. You know what I mean? If you take a size 2, it could fit a person who's like wearing a size 6. So I don't know that and the styling isn't really directed at Gen Z, as you said. It's just like, I feel like they had a whole bunch of this linen program that was probably under the previous management. And they said to, hey, Richard, we need to sell this linen because we have a shitload of it. Can you come up with a cool campaign to get it out there? And that's the old way of thinking versus let's build something that the customer actually wants. And that's how we have traditionally operated as retailers. I remember working for a very legacy type retailer, and it was like, I would be presented, we have a lot of X. Please come up with a campaign to get rid of said X. I would say customer doesn't want said X. Doesn't matter, get rid of said X. And that's why you end up in a endless cycle of markdowns and promotion, like you built too much of something that nobody wants. That's the only reason you have markdowns. You don't need markdowns if you have what people want and you don't have too much of it and you create that scarcity of demand. Like the word capsule now is a popular way of saying we're not going to build a lot of inventory. We're going to have a little capsule and it's going to sell out and then we're going to come back with the next capsule. That's become very popular right now in retail. So maybe there's something to be learned from that. I just think that the mentality of the Gap is, again, pilot high, a little bit like Uniqlo, but Uniqlo is a little bit more successful retailer in terms of their curation and editing and knowing what their customer truly wants.
Part of me wishes with all of this excitement around this launch or new creative from Gap is that they actually didn't tie it to one particular very small seasoned product. And it was like, get to know us again. And then you went to their homepage and there were like maybe 9 boxes or 6 boxes where there's photos of different, I'm going to say ages, but like different generations and different people in certain lifestyles, and you can click through to that. So there would be like a mom with a briefcase and a baby, and then there would be a Gen Z box, and there would be like a working box, and you could go in there and have like a full Gap experience curated based on your own personal lifestyle. Because that they really, if you think of casting a wide net, reintroducing the energy of the brand, and then drilling down, but they cast a wide net, got a ton of eyes on it, and then took everyone to this teensy weensy little piece of their business. Like I would be more than happy to buy some Gap denim. Like to me, Gap's still denim. Okay, if the fit's good, why not? For something that's well priced, well made, fits well, and is maybe a trend. Like I'm not going to invest a lot in a trend, but I'll get like a cargo or something. So I feel like that was a missed opportunity. And I'm sure Roz, particularly if you're spending a lot of time on TikTok, the reaction on the Gap page for the comments, I should say, are all from younger Gen Z. And they're all like, I don't know what they're selling, but I'm buying.
Until they walk in the store.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap. And that's the other thing. This generation that actually was being targeted by that campaign are the ones who are buying Shein and thrifted and all this stuff. So they're very price conscious. And so when they walked in, and that's why they're running the 40%, because they're priced in a way that is not cheap enough for the people who really want like fast fashion. And the people who are going to say, I want to pay a premium, they might go to Zara and they connect Zara with a little bit more premium than say Gap. But Gap is inching up in their pricing. It used to be Old Navy was the cheap and cheerful version of the Gap. But then they started to collide because the pricing became too close and you couldn't differentiate the assortment between the Gap and Old Navy. And so people went to Old Navy and the Gap was left in the dust. It's interesting you bring up denim because that was their heritage. And for me, it would have been interesting for them to bring on Jenna Lyne, who's had a resurgence because of her Real Housewives experience. And the way she dresses is like a denim shirt, a denim pants, like that whole like denim that's lived in, that looks like it's vintage denim. I think they could have gone on the vintage direction so well because they do have the reputation that they could go back into the archives and say, we are truly vintage. We can go back in our archives. Many brands can't say that. So I love the campaign, but I think it's not going to work for them in the short run because people are going to like not the assortment when they get to the store. Which, why are they running markdowns if not? Because otherwise, if it was really working, they wouldn't have to run the markdowns.
Exactly. And when you think about it, just from a material perspective, linen, denim, poplin, these are things that should be part of season lists in your assortment. And it should never go on sale unless, like you said, it's a dud, right? Going back to the Gap, we just don't know what they stand for anymore. Who is their customer? Do they even know? I don't think so. But also, the customer should change depending on where in the region they're selling or where in the market globally they're selling. So I think that there's a challenge around hyper localization. There's a challenge around assortment and fit. Has it been updated? But really, what is their brand identity? That is what is blurry.
When I think about the Gap, I always thought they were for the family because they had baby clothes, they had kids' clothes, they had adults. I love the multi-generational approach. That was one of their approaches back in the early 2000s, where they had a very generational approach with a lot of celebrities and whatever. I feel like they could be that again in the casual space. I just feel like they're trying to be all things to all people. I do think what Uniqlo did is they came in the market and they stole all the things that used to stand for the Gap, like color. Color used to be one of the sort of the pillars of the Gap. You went in and they had all these different colors of sweaters and sweatshirts and t-shirts. Denim, Levi's and other retailers like American Eagle took over the denim category. So they're left floundering. They're not taking back control of the categories that they were really good at. And they're just trying to dilute by being everything and anything. Let's talk about Banana Republic, because they went from being 40% off every single day, cheap quality, and then they suddenly elevated all the fabrics. They went super pricey and expensive. And I just don't think that the customer was up to speed for that pricing. It was like pricing shock for them. I think the reinvention of J. Crew has done brilliantly is they are standing behind a few key categories that they want to be known for, like the lady jacket. If you think about the lady jacket, you think about J. Crew. If you think about cashmere, they own that. That's J. Crew. I just feel like Banana Republic tried to do a little bit of every category, and they didn't really succeed in any of that. There's something to be learned by the curation and sort of the social media of how they brought back J. Crew with the creative director, the woman who was behind it. She became a personality the way that Jenna Lyons was the personality back in the 2000s.
I just want to quickly comment about Banana Republic. I'm not sure if this will be in because maybe it's too much on one thing. In December 2022, not this past December, I meandered into the Banana Republic at Rockefeller Center. I was actually pretty blown away by the assortment. I was like, wow, what happened here? It's really elevated. These are really expensive materials. This is really well done. The prices reflected it, but like in theory, okay, you get what you pay for. And the store's so big. So it was like they had a lot in one kind of delivery bay, and then the next, and then the next. And it was like, wow, I want to come back here. Of course, I never did, and whatever. Then I was like, in a regional area, I was like, oh yeah, Banana did some cool stuff. Let me pop in. And I was like, wait, what? I feel like I think that there's like something happening in the office where there's one team working on the big ideas and they're amazing, and they go to the flagship and they ship in there, and that's like the runway level of clothing. And then everything that goes out regionally is no, hard no. Not even the Grand Central stores, like very mediocre at best. This is anecdotal, which is why I don't really love to include stuff like that, but that's what I experienced. You guys?
I think actually, Christine, you should keep that in because you made a very good point, which is a challenge that's happening across retailers and brands today, where you have merchandising strategy and there's a disconnect with merchandising execution. And the folks that do this really well are H&M or Zara, where they have their capsules, but the things that are going to make customers come into the store, they keep those in their primary collections or capsules, right? And then you add to it, right? Depending on how you've hyper-localized your assortment planning for your stores. The challenge we have is that these archaic ways of planning, which are hindsighting and then looking at stores as in A, B, C, D stores. And when you do it that way, you're not actually looking at who lives in those areas, who has access to those stores. We know during COVID, there was a lot of people in urban centers that moved into the suburbs. So we needed to change the way that we looked at our hierarchy of stores. We are still using the same ways of working. We are still using the same ways of planning. And that's the fundamental challenge. If we do not innovate the process, we are never going to catch up to how the customer has evolved, is evolving. And that's where I would say, keep that comment in, because even when I went to the banana store, when they opened up the temporary store in Soho, when they launched the furniture, I was blown away. In fact, before they launched furniture, I wrote this whole thing. I'm like, banana needs to stay in their lane. I went into that store and I retracted all my statements. I'm like, this is stunning. It is beautiful. It was shoppable. It was the way that they had merchandised the product was like a showroom, and it made you want to shop. They even had a bar. Like, I was so impressed that I took back everything I said about banana launching furniture. But I will say what hadn't changed was their fit blocks. The material was beautiful, but the fact is the clothes just did not fit. And when I think that what banana does really well is they do men's really well. And I've always said that. And I think that's the lane that they should invest in.
You hit the nail on the head, because that store looks good because it was conceived and rented because it was in the right neighborhood with the right assortment for that particular demographic around. The problem is they're dealing with a lot of stores that weren't built for that demographic that they leased probably 5 or 10 years ago, that don't have the demographic for the new, improved redirection of the merchandise, which is extremely upscale. This speaks to why Aritzia is so incredibly successful, because their real estate strategy is basically part of their marketing strategy, part of their merchandising strategy, and they know exactly the customer they're going after, and they're going to be sure that their stores are going to reflect that in the areas where that customer exists. So for these retailers that have too many stores in the wrong places, you can't shift your merchandise strategy, because maybe you have one store in a flagship at Rockefeller Center, but the rest of them are like probably an Old Navy customer. That's the problem. So really, it's like having to blow up their real estate strategy, which is why now people have very short-term leases. They don't sign leases anymore for 10 years or 20 years. So they have to shift their real estate strategy if they really want to go more upscale into this customer demographic. They have to shut a lot of stores down in order to be successful in that strategy.
Breaking down some of those retail silos that I talked about earlier, real estate strategy falls into that. Real estate, merchandising, design, planning, marketing, we're not talking to each other. And breaking down those silos is going to start changing the direction of the conversation and how the assortment strategy is executed. Because if we're all talking together during global strategy at the start of the season, and then we have a check-in at another milestone moment, and then before we lock the assortment, let's talk about, okay, what is our strategy around stores, around channels? Then we could actually start to see the assortment and merchandising strategy come to life where it makes sense.
I agree. I think one thing you touched on, and then we'll wrap because we could do this all day. It's amazing. You guys are amazing. Is customer migration. And what if you have an ABCD door strategy, like how are you gathering that customer migration, either because of the pandemic, so it's permanent, semi-permanent, maybe it's because they have a new hybrid work environment. Certainly there's tourism that needs, and just putting a pin on my personal experience with banana was I went from Rock Center to Grand Central to Vermont. And I was like super excited because I had the time when I was in Vermont. I was like, yay, I'm going to try everything on. And I was like, this is not the same store. It's not the same assortment. This is just not for that customer that's mostly in New York or so, and Midtown or Soho. It's just not speaking to me here. You guys are great. And I want to do this every day.
I
Well,
love
thank
it.
you so much, Christine. It was a pleasure.
It was so fun. Thank you so much. I want to wish you the best, and thanks for coming on What Just Happened.
Thanks, Christine.